in the top 5, where we have Oregon, Ohio State, Georgia, Miami, and Texas, now that's rankings, not seedings, who do you think is most likely to fall out entirely?
Georgia. Look, I know it's sacrilegious to say anything negative about Georgia. I get it. I don't trust y'all. Like, we've been watching Carson Beck. We've been talking about it all year. I just don't trust Georgia with the remaining schedule that they have, knowing that they got to take on Ole Miss. Ole Miss back against the wall. I don't trust Lane Kiffin either. We can just call that my trust issues game this weekend. But also then taking on a Tennessee team that I think can beat them. I know Tennessee's had their fair share of errors too, but these are flawed teams that are taking each other on. And everybody's just waiting to see what happens with Georgia. I could see Georgia losing one of those games, if not 2 of those games. But if they get a split out of those games, now all of a sudden the committee's going to have to make a really difficult decision on what to do with the 2-loss Georgia team that, again, by these metrics, won't be in the conference championship game, depending on what everybody else does. Like, I could see a slippery slope for Georgia where they suddenly find themselves trying to figure out how they lost out on this year's playoff, Adam.
I was trying to debate Georgia today as I was getting ready for the show and for the rankings to come out. And I wanted to still believe in Georgia and still believe a little bit in Carson Beck. But the one stat I saw that really got me like, man, I don't know if Georgia can survive this gauntlet they have coming up is how bad they've been running the football. I didn't even realize just how bad it's been. And I know it wasn't good, but the stats are staggering almost. Like, they're like 15th in the SEC in rushing offense and then 100th in the country or somewhere around there. Like, and when you have a quarterback on top of that who's not playing well, and probably part of that, the reason he's not playing well is because that run game's been so bad and he hasn't had any help, but he's turning the football over. And I'm concerned about Georgia for sure. And the fact that they got to play Ole Miss, then follow up and face Tennessee, I think there's a real likelihood Georgia has 2 losses pretty soon. The question becomes, do they still make it as a 10-2 Georgia team? And I think the answer is yes, but just not as a first round bye, obviously.
I kind of went back and forth with this because the 2 teams that really stuck out to me that I don't trust entirely were Georgia and Texas. Because Texas also has shown its warts. An offensive line that I thought could have been in contention for best in the country, it got absolutely blown up against Georgia, and they got beat up a little bit against Vanderbilt as well. Quinn Ewers hasn't been perfect. He's made several mistakes. He hasn't been that guy that steps up in the big moments like maybe I expected him to be. So I think that Texas has shown more weaknesses in its roster over the past few weeks as maybe we saw in the first few weeks. The reason why I agree, and it's never fun to agree, I hate this. I agree with Georgia. It's the schedule. Like, I think Georgia's defense, if it continues to play how it played against Texas, like, Georgia can win a national championship. That was 2021, 2022 level Georgia defense. Like, that is elite defense. It is not sustainable to win football games when your starting quarterback makes horrendous decisions. He's thrown 11 interceptions in his last 5 games. He threw 3 against Florida. Like, it's almost like I want him to approach this like 2019 Jameis Winston when he threw as many interceptions as he did touchdown passes. Of like, maybe you should get LASIK. Like, maybe you should get your eyes checked because you might be colorblind, because you might not know what color jersey your team is wearing. Kind of bad interceptions. And Texas is kind of the beneficiary of a little bit of a lighter schedule. They host Florida this weekend with a banged up team, and then later in the season, obviously, they get Texas A&M, but Georgia has 2 games on their schedule against Ole Miss and against Tennessee that I think is likely that they could, I'm not going to say likely, possible, very possible that they could lose both of those games. I'm not going to say that they will. I'm not going to say that it's a foregone conclusion, but I think that it's fair to say that going 1-1 in that stretch is a very realistic possibility for this Georgia team. And if your quarterback's turning the ball over at that clip, you're not only not going to win in this tough stretch that you have coming up, you're not going to win in the playoff.
Yeah. Caroline, can I give you another team that I think will not be in the playoff who we have right now? And I know I just made fun of Fitz for saying this, but I was looking at the schedule, and Notre Dame will not be in the college football playoff. And the reason why is because they're going to lose to Army. And the reason I think that will happen is the biggest struggle for these service academy teams is that they never know how teams are going to play them because their offense and their system is so unique. So when they go out in a game like Navy against Notre Dame, they went out in a game and Navy had no clue how Notre Dame would line up against them because there's no one else that Notre Dame plays that even resembles how Navy will play. So they're shocked and when they go out there, Notre Dame has a unique scheme ready to stop them. Well, the difference is now in a uniquely Notre Dame plays Navy and Army, and Army now has that film of how Notre Dame played Navy in that triple option offense. I know Navy got beat bad by ND, but now it is on film, and now Army can prepare for the next few weeks. And since that game happened, for how they can defeat the way Notre Dame will play the triple option, combine that with how well Army has played all season, and I think Army's going to beat Notre Dame. Then that puts Army right back in the mix, depending on what happens with Boise State. But I see Notre Dame being a team that is in the playoff because they can't slip up after that loss against NIU.
Yeah, I agree that the margins are thin. I also think y'all there's a very real conversation about where Alabama fits into all of this. Like, it's a weird world to live in that Texas A&M, Ole Miss, and LSU, all three are not in the initial top 12. We know that. But you can make an argument that all three of those teams still have a very real shot at winning the SEC, which is both wild and maddening at the same time. Like, I'm trying to figure out LSU, Alabama. I keep calling it the loser leaves town match. Like, whoever loses that is just out of this thing completely. We can stick a fork in them. They're done. And
I think we can talk about both of those teams like as one.
Loser
like
leaves town.
LSU and Alabama. Like, the winner of that team is just kind of who we're talking, or if that game, excuse me, is just who we're talking about.
Yeah, I'm all in. But like, it's not hard for me to look at Alabama and say, okay, the way they played at times this year, they don't have any margin either, and I don't have any faith that they're going to win their way out. So they're going to pick up another loss somewhere, and when they do, the committee will dock them for it. Even if that loss is in the SEC championship game, I'm not sure Alabama can survive another L in the loss column.
No. Texas A&M cannot survive another L in the loss column. A&M cannot. LSU cannot. Alabama cannot. You get your third loss, I think you're donezo. In this field, I don't think that's a blanket rule forever and always, forever and ever, amen. You get 3 losses, you're not going to the playoff. But in this field, in the way that the committee has approached these rankings, third loss, you're out of there. Now, if it's your third loss in the conference championship game, I don't know how the committee weighs that. I would have to say that
and that's where it gets tough for Alabama. Like, if Alabama gets to the conference championship game and then takes an L in the conference championship game to whoever they're playing, I don't know that they can even undertaker that. I don't know that they can rise up from it. I think like you might just stick a fork in them at that point, even if it's a third loss, even if it's even if it's a conference game, the championship game that gives them their third loss. I don't know that they're going to be able to survive depending on what's happened around them.
I mean, it's probably looking like whoever loses the SEC championship game isn't in the playoff. I mean, by how some of this has played out, and if that's a 2-loss team in the title game, I mean that's probably the likely scenario at this point. Wouldn't you say?
Yeah. Unless it's a team that has 1 loss and wins out and gets their second loss in the conference championship game.
Yeah,
and I think there is only a path for 2 teams to have 1 loss getting into the playoff. It would be Georgia or Tennessee, because those 2 teams play each other, and Texas, because those are the only 3 remaining 1-loss teams in the SEC, I believe.
So, and this is where, again, I'm going to hammer this home every week. What becomes wild to me is that there's a very real scenario where a team walks into the conference championship game with 2 losses. They lose that conference championship game, gives them their third L, they're out. And now another team that didn't even play in the conference championship game from the SEC with 2 losses is going to be like, hey, we're making the college football playoff. Like, I can see that happening. Yeah. I don't know that you can survive a third loss even in a championship game. And that's just going to be, it is wild in the scenario you just laid out. Let's say Tennessee is not in the conference championship game. They got 2 losses, and then they watch somebody pick up their third L in the conference championship game. Tennessee would make it over them with only 2 Ls.